Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Robert Chappell, Executive Editor of Madison365, with your daily update for January 5th. We're going to do it a little differently today because I just finished watching a 2-hour press conference, so I'm going to get to that first because that's what's on my mind. So we'll talk through some non-COVID news for a few minutes first, if you don't mind, and then we'll get to the COVID news in the second half. But really, what's important right now, that the 2-hour press conference was, they didn't need 2 hours to do this, to announce this, but they took 2 hours to announce that the police officer who shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back will not face charges. The Kenosha County District Attorney, Michael Gravely, had his press conference along with Noble Ray, who was the former Madison police chief, who was brought in as an independent use of force expert to look over the case. And they obviously wanted to do this all very carefully, but what they ended up doing was basically laying out the fact that the district attorney, as a prosecutor, didn't feel like he could win the case if he were to bring charges against Russian Shesky, who's the police officer involved. Basically, he's saying, like, I can't, ethically speaking, you're not supposed to bring a prosecution unless you think you can win, right? Unless you think you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty. And he felt like he couldn't do that in this case. And there's really only one thing he had to say, in my estimation, and that is that all this thing we've heard this whole time, that Jacob Blake was unarmed, was not true. That I don't know how you can see this, but that's a picture of the knife Jacob Blake had in his hand. There was a lot of talk at the time that what that was in his hand, what it could have been his keys, could have been a cell phone, could have been a knife. Turns out it was a knife, and turns out it was this sort of razor blade kind of knife, and it was open. There's some, question as to whether he was wielding it, or in what way he was wielding it toward the police officers. We know he was walking away from the police officers. We also know that the vehicle was in dispute, that the woman who called 911 said it was her car and it was her kid, and he wasn't supposed to be taking her kid. So the police officer was thinking, is this going to be a hostage situation? Is this going to be a high-speed pursuit? So that's why he had to keep Jacob Blake from getting in the car. Not as clear why he had to shoot him 7 times in the back. But the point is, given that he had a knife, given that he was armed, it would be easy to make a self-defense case, and therefore the prosecutor didn't feel like he could make the case. He didn't feel like he could prove beyond reasonable doubt that it wasn't self-defense and that it was aggravated assault or whatever charge would have been. Now, we just did that in 5 minutes. So I didn't need 2 hours to do that. What they spent the rest of the time doing was attacking the character of Jacob Blake. It was really disturbing. Now, he did it under the guise of, well, first of all, he laid out a bunch of, he did it under the guise of laying out the situation, that it was a domestic abuse situation, which they knew, which they didn't know it was domestic abuse, but they knew it was a domestic dispute. So they had to make certain assumptions that there might be tensions might be high, and there might be a person who's prone to violence there, right? The prosecutor brought up, I think, 5 different incidents, which the same person has called police for this with the same complaint, that Jacob Blake had her car keys and wasn't giving them back. It was basically the same complaint 5 different times, going back to 2012. So he sees that as this is a pattern of domestic violence, domestic abuse, domestic dispute. So he spends 10 minutes laying that out and then says, but this isn't relevant. Everything I've just told you is not relevant because the officers involved did not know about it at the time. They didn't know that there was a pattern of domestic abuse. But I'm telling you now. Why am I telling you now? I don't know. I just think you should know this. And then he talks about if I brought this to trial, here's what the defense would say. They'd make a self-defense case, right? And that's reasonable. That was actually the part of the press conference that made sense. I don't know why it took him this long to say that there was a knife. It took him however many months now, and it took him a half hour into the press conference to say there was a knife. That's all you had to say, dude. That's all you had to say. But instead, he laid out, here's how the trial would go. Here's how the hypothetical prosecution would go. And here's how the hypothetical defense attorneys would cross-examine Jacob Blake. And then he spent a half hour cross-examining Jacob Blake. And it was disgusting. It was unnecessary. The only reason he did that was so that we all would feel a certain way about Jacob Blake. He talked about that Jacob Blake, as a witness for the prosecution, would have to be credible. And he mentioned a few times that Jacob Blake was not truthful in the past. He mentioned that Jacob said to the officers, "I would not pull a knife on police." But then he brought up an incident in 2010, 10 years ago, when Jacob Blake drew a knife on police. And the guise of it was, I'm just saying this because this is what the defense attorneys would say. You know what, though? There aren't any defense attorneys. Okay? All you had to say, you didn't have to go through this hypothetical trial because there's never going to be a trial because he had a knife. You could just say that. Say he was armed. The defense would make a credible self-defense claim, and therefore I can't bring this prosecution. That's all you got to say. You didn't have to pretend that there was a trial happening today. You don't have to talk through that. That was not necessary. And you know that wasn't necessary. And we also had Noble Ray on to talk about the sort of from the perspective of a police officer who is coming into a domestic situation where there were children involved, and that the sort of the uncertainty involved there, which also is that's all relevant. Jacob Blake's past for this wasn't relevant at all. So, might the statements at the press conference have an effect on the civil lawsuit against the city of Kenosha? I'm not an attorney. I don't know. I would imagine that the family's attorneys are going to go through all those statements with a fine-tooth comb. And the thing is, none of it is defamatory. It's all true. It just wasn't necessary. Like, they can't make a case that the DA was defaming Jacob Blake, because the defense against defamation is truth, and everything he said was true. I'm just saying it wasn't necessary in this moment, right? He also did say that there would be no charges filed against Jacob Blake, which was like, well, that's so nice. Thank you for that. So anyway, that's the Jacob Blake situation. That's what we know from Kenosha today. I don't know why that took 2 hours, but it did. And I get that they want to lay out the case. They want to make it clear that we have thought this through. Here's everything we've thought through. But they could have done that in 10 minutes. And all they had to say was he was armed. They could have focused it on the moment. They could have focused it on the incident. They didn't. And yes, if there were a trial, all that stuff from the past would have come up. No doubt about it. But there's not a trial. So you didn't have to bring it up, Mike, gravely. You didn't have to do that. And we know why you did, okay? All right. No further opinion on that. Some other news items, however, as long as we're on the non-COVID news for now. There's something we just posted a few minutes ago, Madison365.org. Alder Paul Skidmore, who represents the west side of Madison, and Alder Sherry Carter, who represents the south side, and who is the city council president, have used President Carter's prerogative to slip an item onto the agenda without going through the normal committee process. The council president has that authority, and they've put it on the agenda tonight, a resolution condemning violence in all forms for any reason, which sounds nice. These resolutions are written where there's a whereas, now therefore be it resolved. The first four whereases are all about protesters damaging buildings and how we want the city of Madison, Common Council, and Mayor's office to condemn that. Then it switches to violence begets violence and gun violence is a problem. So I'm not sure that they meant to blame. Basically, the way it reads is like there's this protester violence against buildings. Violence begets violence, and there's gun violence. And so it's kind of like attaching those two things together. I can't imagine they meant to do that. And given that the rest of the resolution is like full of typos and like grammatical errors, I think they just didn't think that through. I don't think they meant to pivot quite like that, but that's the way it reads. But the one thing it doesn't condemn is police violence. It doesn't condemn sexual assault. Doesn't condemn any other kind of violence. So it has gotten a bit of pushback. And there are, so far that we know, 4 people registered to speak tonight in opposition to it. Both Skidmore and Carter were given the opportunity to comment and did not do so. But both of their opponents did. These are the only 2 alders, I believe, the only 2 currently sitting alders that have opponents. Sherry Carter is being opposed by Brandy Grayson. We'll talk more about her in a minute. Paul Skidmore actually has 3 opponents because he's been very controversial in his regard for his support of police, support of militarization of police, and allegedly using a very misogynistic slur against a constituent during a meeting that was on Zoom that apparently he didn't know his mic was hot. He's denied it, but he's got a very distinctive voice. We'll say that. So he's got 3 challengers, and I spoke with one of them, Nikki Conklin, and I spoke with Brandon Grayson, who's running against Sherry Carter. That story is on the site right now, Madison365.org. Other news, this broke last night. Tremaine Clardy, who we've talked about before, who's the chief of middle schools in Madison, has been since 2017. He has been selected as the new superintendent of the Verona area school district. As far as anybody knows, I can't say this definitively, but it seems as if he will be the first person of color to lead that district. It's a very diverse district, and it's becoming more and more diverse every year because it encompasses portions of Fitchburg, which is probably the fastest growing city in Dane County, and a very diverse city. A lot of Latino residents, a lot of Black residents, and so the district is growing very, very fast and diversifying very fast. So to have a person of color at the helm, probably not a bad idea. There were 4 finalists. Randy Briggs withdrew his name from consideration, so we're down to 3, and Tremaine Clardy was announced last night as the unanimous choice of the school board. He will begin that role on July 1st. And finally, this morning, we had a profile. This was not, we didn't mean to align this with that other story involving Brandy Grayson, but Brandy is running for office. She's an agitator. She's an activist. She was really present at the beginning of the Young, Black, and Gifted movement in Madison, going back to 2014. That was an organization that responded to the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. That was kind of the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, and YGB was kind of the Madison local response to that. And then, of course, they became very involved when Tony Robinson was shot and killed here in Madison by police officer Matt Kenney. And she's been at the forefront of these protests since then, over 5 years now. And she's also founder of Urban Triage, which is a nonprofit organization, and she is now running for office against Sherry Carter, the council president, to represent the South Side. Dave Dahmer, our editor, spoke with her at length. She talked a lot about her reasons for wanting to jump in and do the race, to elected office now, and what she hopes to bring to Common Council to represent the South Side. So that if you're in Madison, you should, take a look at that story just to make sure you're an informed voter. And we will at some point in the next week or so have a profile on her opponent, Sherry Carter, in her tenure on the council so far, and what she hopes to accomplish in the future if she were to retain that seat. Okay, that is all the non-COVID news I have for you today. Any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments there. We will go over a pretty bad day of COVID numbers as well. When we come back, don't scroll away. I'll have all of the COVID information and 95 deaths today. And we'll kind of break down all those numbers in about 15 seconds. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Online learning does not have to be scary. And Madison College was there for me.
We have people that are dedicated to our students' online success.
We can help you with your technology. Give us the college try for 7 days. No risk, no worries. Madison College.
All right, we're back. The coronavirus situation in Wisconsin continues to be bad. We're still testing is better today. We're still catching up from the holidays and not having a lot of testing happening, or a lot of tests being processed. So it's a combination of people just not getting tested very much, but then also it takes a couple extra days to process those tests when a lot of offices are closed, people are away for the holidays, etc. So today we had 8,200 tests, which is better than yesterday. We only had about 3,900 yesterday. However, 3,403 were positive today. So that's the test rate just for today, 41%. Again, that number, grain of salt, those are tests from over the past few days. So, don't put too much stock in that number. The number you should be worried about, though, the number that I'm really worried about, is the 7-day average, which is to say the percentage of people who tested positive over the past 7 days. Which, when you look at it over 7 days, you smooth out those spikes, and then like 1 day anomaly will get smoothed out in the average. 31.9% of people tested in the past 7 days tested positive. That's the highest in a month. The total number of tests, because several of those people that are tested in the past 7 days are tested multiple times. 11.2% of all tests come back positive. That's up from 10.7 yesterday, which was up from like 10.3 the day before that. So that's rising rapidly. I don't like that at all. Especially after it had been coming down for 6 weeks. It was down every day for 6 weeks. We had all the way down to 8.1. And now it's and at that point I was thinking we might be actually doing better for the spring. If that 8.1 keeps going down under 5, under 3, like that's good. That would be great. I would be much more comfortable like opening schools, and really releasing restrictions if we got that number down to 3 or 4. And it was headed that way, and now it's not. Now it's back up to 11.2. So that's not great. Also not great. Active cases is rising again. Is now 27,600, a little bit more than that, which is about 5.6%. Is that right? Did I say that right? 5.6? Oh, there are so many numbers. 5.4. I'm sorry, 5.46% of all the cases we've ever seen are currently active. The percentage is not terrible. That percentage was much higher. However, it was 5.2 yesterday. So, again, that's a number that was going down. That the number itself doesn't look terrible, but the fact that it's larger than yesterday, don't like that. We have had now total confirmed cases 491,341. So we'll pass 500,000 cases in the next couple of days, probably, maybe 3 days. The other bad news today: 95 deaths reported. Again, these are not people who died today or yesterday, and this is catching up from the fact that we've had single digits reported in the past 3 days. Because of the holidays, we had 10 reported on the 1st, 1 on the 2nd, 5 on the 3rd, and 9 yesterday. And the fact that the reason those are so low is that it takes a lot of time and effort and just paperwork, basically, to get a death certificate uploaded to their database, examined by a public health worker, and certified as a COVID, to have the cause of death basically certified at the county level. Until all that happens, the death doesn't show up in this data. Okay. And that wasn't happening over the holiday weekend. So this 95 deaths today is basically catching up from that. So I was concerned that it might be over 100, so we didn't do that. But it is the third highest of a single day. I'm a little concerned about what we're going to see tomorrow. So tomorrow will continue to catch up. We did have 30 counties report at least one fatality today. We can go through real quick where these fatalities are reported. 14 in Waukesha County. Again, that's because there's some catch up, right? 9 in Kenosha County. 8 in Dane County, which is higher than usual. We usually see here in Dane County. 7 in Racine County. 5 in Wood County. 4 each in Walworth and Brown counties. Brown County, incidentally, had 343 new cases today. That's kind of a lot for Brown County. Then 3 each in Winnebago, Washington, Rock, Ozaukee, Milwaukee, Marinette, Lincoln counties. Milwaukee County concerns me a tiny bit. It's because when you're thinking of a catch-up day on the data, you would expect Milwaukee County to have more than 3. So I'm worried that the Milwaukee County is going to show up with like 20 tomorrow or something. Okay, fingers crossed they don't, but just put it out there. Waushara County reports 2 fatalities. Shawano, Sauk, Outagamie, Oconto, Fond du Lac, and Burnett all report 2. And then each of these counties reports 1. Washburn, Trempealeau, Portage, La Crosse, Greene, Eau Claire, Dorr, Dodge, and Chippewa. And that's all the counties that report fatalities today. That puts because the last couple of days have been so low, our daily average of deaths for the past 7 days is all the way down to 28. But again, that's really not useful just because we know that there's a lot of deaths that haven't been reported for the past, 10 days or so, going back to Christmas. So we'll get a much better sense of where we are in terms of deaths probably a week from now, honestly, is when we'll kind of get that number squared away. I will say also today that hospitalizations are back down. 1,102 people hospitalized. That's 20 fewer than yesterday after 2 days of increases of over 50. So that's encouraging. I wouldn't be surprised if our deaths continue to remain relatively under control, in the 30 or 40 per day range, which is very, very high still. But, we were around 55 for Thanksgiving every day. But since then, our hospitalizations have gone down, which means I would hope that our deaths will go down also as we go through January. It'll certainly be higher than 28. Like that's certainly not a representative number right now. But I would hope that it doesn't skyrocket back up to the 50s or 60s on a daily basis. I would also expect to see, as Brandy points out, Brandy, thank you for joining us. Christmas happened at New Year's. Absolutely true. I mentioned yesterday, we didn't see a huge spike after Thanksgiving that I was worried that we were going to see. I think part of that, it might be the case that we didn't see that big spike because there just wasn't a hell of a lot of testing happening. Like there may have been a spike that we never saw because not enough people got tested. But it's also possible that people were well behaved and didn't actually go to Thanksgiving as much as we thought they might. We know New Year's Eve celebrations happened. We know people gathered for Christmas. We will, given the low amount of testing that's happened in the past 10 days, I don't think we will see for sure that big. If there's going to be a spike, we won't see it until I would say about a week from now. It feels like it's beginning, though. You know what I mean? Those 7-day positive test rates going up, the number of active cases going up. Feels like it's coming. So what that means is stay vigilant, right? Don't, keep your mask on. Do not, don't think it's okay. I can go to my friend's house. It's fine. Everything's fine. Don't do that. What else can I tell you? Any questions, drop them in the comments there. Happy to answer any questions you have. It looks like I think that's everything. Again, just to recap, the 7-day positive test rate is now 11.2. The rate from all people, now 31.9. That 11.2 number needs to be under 3 before we can really talk about opening things up, before we can really talk about everything being okay. Now, I will also say the legislature either has passed or is ready to pass their first COVID package, which is not a relief package. It's not a health package. It is a make sure businesses stay open package. And it would, if approved, if passed and signed by the governor, it would limit the amount of authority local health authorities could have to close businesses. And it would basically push schools to open and stuff like that. It would provide no relief for anybody who's affected by the virus, and it would not assist in vaccinations, and it would not affect the spread of the disease in any way, except to make it spread more. So that's where the Republican legislature is right now. The governor, I'm sure, will veto that package. There is a compromise package on the table that the governor has proposed that they have not yet taken up. Maybe they will in the next couple of days. At least they're meeting now, right? So that's all I have for you today. Georgia Senate races today. We'll be watching that tonight. We'll keep you up to date on that. We'll have the latest on that tomorrow's. It's only 10 minutes. We'll also we'll recap any reaction if any big protests or anything happen in Kenosha. We'll have that news as well in the morning. So watch for that. Watch for the It's Only 10 Minutes podcast tomorrow morning. And then I'll be back tomorrow afternoon with another update on all the news of the day and your coronavirus information. Until then, have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
This is 365 Media.